Greetings. This is Professor Neil Hamilton from the Drake University Agricultural Law Center with another installment in our project, Law for Landowners. Today, the subject is 10 things landowners can do to help improve wildlife habitat. One of the great joys of being a landowner is the opportunity to view wildlife. Whether it's the birds that gather at the feeder, whether it's the flock of turkeys coming out of the grove at dusk, or maybe the sight of a wily fox skulking through the field. Iowa has a rich and diverse history when it comes to wildlife, but unfortunately, in recent years, the populations of many common species, quail and pheasants, have declined. Oftentimes, this has been due to the loss of habitat, as more land has been put into tillage to raise crops, as more fence rows have been taken out so that we can have larger fields. It's oftentimes hard for wildlife to find somewhere to call home. The same is true when it comes to our fish populations, as deteriorating water quality and more siltation has made it hard for fish and other amphibians to find a place to live and reproduce. But the story doesn't have to be a sad one. Most of Iowa's land is privately owned, and that means that most of the wildlife we have in our state live on privately owned land. That means if we want a brighter future for wildlife in Iowa, it's going to take the cooperation and participation and active support of private landowners to help create those opportunities. The first idea is to keep wildlife in mind when you're making decisions as to how you manage your land. Ask yourself some questions before you take actions that might endanger wildlife or change the habitat that they are using. What impact will it have to tear out a fence row or to bulldoze that grove of trees? When should you mow if you're concerned about when birds may still be on the nest? By thinking about wildlife and keeping it in mind when you make your decisions, you'll have taken a first important step. The second idea is creating new habitat or leaving existing habitat in place. Making room for nature is an important consideration in how you manage your property. Getting rid of a farm pond that you no longer need because you sold the livestock may be appealing, but you ever stop to think about how many different species of critters may be using that farm pond? Whether it's the fish or the migrating ducks or the frogs or any of the other game that may be using it as a feed source and as a place to water. Leaving some room for wildlife and working with nature to create their habitat is an important step that landowners can take. A third idea to keep in mind is how you might be able to take non-productive cropland and use it to support wildlife. As more and more farms have yield monitors and other methods of calculating the productivity and profitability of farms, it's becoming clear that many of us have at least a few acres on our property that may never be profitable, that they don't produce enough crop to make it worthwhile farming them or to justify the cost of the seed and fertilizer. These small tracts may be perfect places to retire from crop production and to turn into wildlife habitat. That habitat may be as simple as planting milkweeds and other attractive plants that are used by migrating butterflies, or they could be food plots for game animals, or just restoring natural prairie, which many animals will find an attractive place to live. These small sites can play a vital role in providing wildlife a place to eat and to nest and to thrive and to exist in a sea of corn and soybeans. These small sites might even be eligible to participate in some of the conservation programs, like the CRP, or the Conservation Reserve Program. A fourth idea is to think about using stream-side buffer strips as corridors for wildlife. And one of the most promising techniques that we have in our state to address water quality is planting vegetative buffers along streams and rivers and even drainage ditches. Well, as you probably know, wildlife often moves along water courses, and using buffer strips can create a linear corridor that wildlife can use to move between properties and to find places to live. So keeping in mind vegetative buffers and how they can help improve wildlife habitat along our rivers and streams is an important idea for landowners to consider. A fifth opportunity to improve or create new wildlife habitat would be to restore a wetland or restore an oxbow that you may have. Many farms in Iowa, particularly those in north central Iowa, have land that was formerly wetland. It's now been drained, but it can be restored. In fact, we've restored tens of thousands of acres of wetlands in the state, oftentimes with the assistance of federal conservation programs. Restoring a wetland is a way to create almost overnight an attractive place for wildlife, whether it's migratory birds or all of the other animals that seem to thrive around wetlands. The same thing is true for farms that may be next to rivers and streams. Oftentimes these farms may have former oxbows where the streams were straightened, but you still have those indentations or places that could be restored. Many farmers are restoring oxbows both as a way to improve water quality, but also can provide important wildlife benefits. A sixth thing that landowners can do to help wildlife is to keep wildlife in mind when you're harvesting your crops. By not removing the stover or plowing it under in the fall, you can help leave both a food source and the type of residue that game and small animals can use for cover during the winter to try to survive. Similarly, leaving a row or two of corn, perhaps down along the timber or down near the creek, can pay important benefits in terms of providing a food source to wildlife to help them make it through what can be difficult winters in our state. By keeping wildlife in mind and making some room for them when you make your farming decisions, you can go a long way in helping create a brighter opportunity for them and for more opportunities for you to enjoy wildlife. A seventh idea that landowners can keep in mind is to take part in the public conservation programs that are designed to provide financial assistance for landowners interested in creating wildlife habitat. A number of the popular conservation programs like EQIP, the Environmental Quality Incentives Program, and the CSP, the Conservation Stewardship Program, have provisions in them that are designed to provide assistance for the creation of wildlife habitat. If you stop in and talk to the Soil and Water Conservation Commission and those officials, or your county conservation board, they'll be happy to provide you with information about the type of public programs that might be available to provide you some financial assistance and advice for what you can do to help create wildlife habitat. The eighth thing that landowners can keep in mind is the idea of getting expert advice if you need it. The Iowa Department of Natural Resources is responsible for managing and implementing Iowa's game laws and also for trying to support our wildlife population. The department has many employees who are experts on all different types of wildlife. And if you have questions or need advice on how to create habitat or what you can do to help support different types of wildlife populations, you should consider asking them for some assistance. You may even have local county officials that have many of those same talents. In addition, there are private organizations like the Audubon Society and the trout fishermen who are also very interested in helping support wildlife populations. The ninth idea is the opportunity to work with sportsmen's organizations who are very involved in working with landowners to try to create more public hunting areas. Groups like Ducks Unlimited and Pheasants Forever are well known for helping provide financing for the acquisition of land to be used for public hunting. But in addition, they're also happy to work with private landowners who are interested in improving the habitat and creating more opportunities for game on their property. There are other organizations as well that are happy to work in these areas, whether they're prairie groups or bird enthusiasts or butterfly fanciers. A 10th and final idea to keep in mind is that there are public programs that actually will pay private landowners to make their land available for public hunting or for public use, such as fishing. Both the federal and state government have programs that will provide this type of compensation. For example, the Iowa Department of Natural Resources will actually buy easements along trout streams so that fishermen and fisherwomen have the opportunity to enjoy these natural resources. Under Iowa law, landowners who participate in these type of programs are protected from any potential liability. So the point is, if you're interested in seeing more wildlife and recognizing what you can do on your land to help create opportunities for wildlife, there are a number of things that you can do.